For tonight's Green Report, we head out west to Colorado, which last month was the site of one of the worst chemical spills in recent memory. The trouble began back in August when a private for-profit company under contract to the EPA visited the Gold King mine near Silverton for some much-needed cleanup. During the course of that cleanup, a leak sprung in a protective barrier, sending 2 million tons of toxic groundwater filled with heavy chemicals, heavy metals like arsenic and lead into the nearby Animas River. That water quickly worked its way downstream into the neighboring states of Utah and New Mexico, turning everything it touched a bright orange color and threatening Lake Powell, a source of drinking water for millions. In the wake of the Animas River spill, Republicans in Congress were quick to blame the EPA. The whole situation, they said, was just another example of how big government can't ever be trusted to do things right. Even worse, they added, it showed that the government is just plain hypocritical, fining businesses for making mistakes when its own contractors can't handle a basic mine cleanup. Congressman John Fleming echoed this line of thinking during a hearing last Thursday. Take a look.
And then you look at this situation. Incompetently, the EPA allowed, of course, this toxic spill, this water that is now in our environment. It'll never be cleaned up completely. So I guess what I'm saying is it seems like to me there's a double standard. The EPA is not holding itself to the same standards that you hold individuals and industry itself to.
But was the Animas River spill really just about government incompetence? Yes and no. There's no question that the EPA and its contractors share some of the blame for what went wrong in Colorado, but the real story here is the outdated law regulating sites like the Gold King mine and the underfunded agency tasked with enforcing that law. As the policy director of Earthworks put it in a statement released before last week's hearings, blaming the EPA for the Animas River mine waste disaster is like blaming the fire department for kicking down your door to put out your house fire after you ignored the fire marshal's warnings and cut the fire department's budget. Joining me now for more on this is one of America's leading environmentalists, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Chief Prosecuting Attorney for the Hudson River Keepers and President of the Waterkeeper Alliance. Robert Kennedy Jr., great to have you back on the show, Bobby.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's great to see you. So, as I mentioned, Republicans in Congress have put the entire blame for the Animas River spill on the EPA. Let's get that out of the way first. How much blame, in your view, does the EPA deserve for what happened?
Well, I like the metaphor that Earthworks used. I was thinking of a similar metaphor, which is that you run over somebody in the street and you blame the EMT for not saving them on the way to the hospital. But this is the same thing that the Republicans did. You remember in 2002 when they had the energy crisis in California, and Dick Cheney blamed the environmentalists for causing the energy crisis. It later turned out it was Enron manipulating the markets, but that is the go-to strategy, which is to point the finger at, at the people who are actually trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And in this case, there may have been some fault by the EPA contractors, and clearly, as you implied in the introduction, EPA has been defunded by the Republicans, so maybe it's not operating at full strength. But the real problem here is the 1872 mining law, which the Republicans have defended down to the last bastion.
Give us the details of that.
Well, the mining law was passed during the administration of Ulysses S. Grant, and was passed in order to persuade Americans to give them very, very easy access to the minerals on Western lands in order to persuade as many as possible to move west, to fortify the Western territories against incursions from Mexico, from Great Britain, and also from the Indians. So the way it was structured and the way it still exists today is if an individual or a company files a patent on any piece of federal land, of BLM land or any of the other federal lands in the West, that you can take all of the minerals off that land by just paying $5 an acre for the surface of that land. So a few years ago, American Barrick, which is a Canadian company, got $16 billion worth of gold on American lands for about $1,600.
Oh.
So we're essentially taking our patrimony, the minerals that you and I own, and that the American people own, that our children own, and we're giving them away to free, mainly to multinational mining companies who come and file patents on American land, and the Republicans are protecting this. They are, so far, they've taken over $300 billion of our metals off of our land without paying any money for those metals or any royalties. And not only that, Tom, but after they do the mining, they're not required to clean up. Even in West Virginia, they require the coal miners to reclaim the land. They don't do it, but at least the law says that they've got to do it. But in the Western lands, they don't even have to do it. So they leave these, they've left 500,000 mines behind in the Western states. Every one of them is leaching, as you said, arsenic, cyanide, mercury, and all kinds of manganese, zinc into our Western rivers. 40% of the headwaters of Western streams have now been poisoned by these toxic chemicals from all of these mines. And you and I, end up with the bill. So they've taken $300 million off of those lands for free and left with their pockets stuffed with cash. And they've left us with a bill, an estimated $72 billion that it's going to cost us, and mainly EPA, to clean up their mess. It makes no sense, and yet the Republicans defend this law and are attacking EPA.
Well, and presumably they're defending the law because the Republican Party essentially is for sale. I mean, it is the party of big business and billionaires, and you throw a little campaign money at these guys and they'll be with you. So this 1872 mining law essentially
of course,
gives...
it's the Koch brothers, it's their Koch brothers and their other big funders who are taking advantage of these laws.
Huh. Yeah. So is there any effort to do anything about this? Is there even a broad knowledge of this out west, that this 1872 mining law is screwing everything up?
It's been at least since I've been an environmental advocate 30 years ago, this was always one of the holy grails of the environmental movement, was to reform the 1872 Mining Act. But and I know environmentalists in the Western states who have spent their lives trying to reform it, but the power centers that are arrayed against anybody who tries to do this, it's a really bad comment on our democracy, because clearly this is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of anybody in the United States except for a few miners. It's doing terrible damage to our public land, to our patrimony, and yet there are people within Congress who are owned by these mining companies and who are defending the Percocets of the plutocrats.
Yeah.
Rather than the welfare and the public interest of the American people.
Are there any Democratic champions on this? There's
a lot. In fact, there's a bill now that has been, I think it was originally Barbara Boxer's bill and has support from the senators from New Mexico. So there's some support in the Western states among the Democrats, but the Republicans who control those committees and who control those states will not let those bills onto the floor of Congress.
Wow. So it's going to take really changing who controls Congress as a starting point. We're going to have Democrats and a majority of Democrats in both the House and Senate, if there's even to be a discussion about this, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So in the minute we have left, Bobby, what can people do?
Well, you can write your congressperson or your senator and ask them to try to repeal the 1872 Mining Act and find out where they stand on it. And then you can support the Animas Riverkeeper that is on the water trying to clean up this site right now, and has been the eyes and ears of the public in terms of letting us know what's happening on the site.
And how do we find them? Is there a particular website for them?
You can go to Waterkeeper Alliance. I think it's www.waterkeeper.org, and you can find the Animas Riverkeeper through Waterkeeper.
Yeah, great stuff. It's amazing work that you're doing. This is absolutely astonishing. This 1872 law is letting these billionaires just steal all of our wealth, and it's amazing. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Tom.
Great to see you.